Okay, so I just got done with the recording for my draft tier list updates since I didn't really think about patch 25.12 as much as I should have. Originally, I was going to bundle this video and that update together, and then I ended up talking about draft changes and patch notes for like an hour, so I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna make it a separate video. But hey, I guess I'll do the same intro. Yeah, if you're new here, if you've only seen my MSI videos, then yep, surprise, I'm a VTuber. This is how I look on my stream and in most of my other content. Yeah, so this video I'm going to do player tier lists and team tier lists. This video will definitely be more opinionated than my team breakdowns. With my team breakdowns, I tried to be more objective. Like, I tried to give all of the players props where I felt like their props were due. I tried to, like, point out what I thought every player's strengths and weaknesses were. This video will be a little bit more of my personal opinions, so, like, what I truly think about players and how much their strengths and weaknesses affect each other. So, yeah, let's just get it straight into that. Start with top lane. This is my top lane tier list. In S tier, Doran, Keen, Flandre. In A tier, Bin. B is Broken Blade Driver. And in C tier, I have everybody else. Notably, I have nobody in D tier. I think that all of the top laners are good enough that none of them are D tier. So let's just go through these. I'll go through them in reverse order. So Gigo I have as the 10th place top laner, but I actually think Gigo is pretty solid. That's why I have him in C. If you guys go back and watch my MSI 2024 or 2023 player rankings, I do have players in D tier and F tier. So the fact that I kept all of them in C tier does mean something. I actually think that Gigo is like a fine top laner. Domestically, he's very good mechanically. Kind of like heading into the split, his whole entire thing was like, oh, he's one of those players who like has pretty good hands but no brain, and he'll just like run it down. But I think that Furia have been doing a pretty good job at all being on the same page, which helps Gigo out. Whenever I see Gigo on carries, it always feels like he is able to get the advantages with the carries that he needs to get. It also feels like his team is very good at playing around him when he gets those carries. So like, for example, there will be a lot of teams across the world who will pick Camille top, and then they won't actually path top or play for the Camille, and then the Camille will die to one gank, and then the entire game blows open, right? Furia is pretty good at not doing that. Like, in most... So, Gigo picks carries more frequently than the other top laners on this list, but the thing that makes it, like, especially important is that when Gigo picks these carries, Tadu, IU, and Jojo will actually play around him. So, Tadu will play to path topside and get Gigo the advantages he needs to get to make the pick worth it. And then IU and Jojo are completely fine kind of playing a more weak side bot lane 2v2. So when Gigo picks carries, his team is good at facilitating him, and I think he's mechanically good enough to pull it off. So that's why I brought him all the way up to C tier. I just want to give him props that, like, even though I put him in last, I think he's a good player. It's just that the problem is that when you're at a tournament like MSI, and you only have 2 teams per region, that means that all of the regions are realistically probably sending their best players in most of their roles. So, like, yeah, it looks bad to see Gigo in 10th, but I think that if this was like a Worlds tier list and there were 4 European top laners or something in here, or like 3 European top laners, and then like 2 North American top laners, and however many LCP top laners are, I think that Gigo would be ahead of some of them, right? Like, I think off the top of my head, if we imagine a world where the Vikings from LCP qualify for Worlds, and then that means that Kratos is on this tier list, I would have Gigo above a player like Kratos. Yeah, I guess that's all I have to say for there. Rest, I have here. I think that Rest was a better player relative to the rest of the competition a few years ago. I thought that he was more in line with being better than the rest of the competition in like the 2021 through 2023 years, and now he's kind of a little bit on the decline. For the most part, his role is kind of, he can pick everything and play it at a serviceable level. So he is your serviceable level top laner. The main spot where I would put Rest above a player like Gigo is that I think that Rest is overall more consistent. Something that Gigo and Furia as a whole would do in their games is, and I mentioned this in my breakdown, is that they would sometimes overload on bad timings. Essentially what that means is that they would send both of their solo laners to the same side of the map in an attempt to get some kind of extra advantage, but Furia would often do it at the wrong times where they would do it when the enemy team was in a position where they could respond to the overload and then punish them for it. So that's the type of thing that I would mark down Furia's solo laners for. I feel like that's not the type of mistakes that Rest would make. Rest is more consistent than that. I also think Rest is more consistent than Kiaya, but I have Kiaya higher because I think that Kiaya just has a higher ceiling than Rest. He's been a very high upside top laner for the last couple of years now. He's the type of player where he can play weak side if he needs to, but his main forte is picking more carries, so kind of similar to Gigo. Kiaya likes to play stronger. I mean, like Gigo, he's like more of your Camille, Aatrox, Jace, these types of like super volatile carries, whereas Kiaya is more of like the like stable carries player. So like Kiaya really likes picking Gwen, for example. My problem with Kiaya is that I feel like he has laning inconsistencies in the sense that specifically I feel like he can struggle with jungle tracking. So there were a couple of times in LCP playoffs where he would die to extremely telegraphed ganks. There was one especially bad one where the enemy team, or the enemy jungler, did a standard bot to top 6 camp full clear into gank, and Kiaya, I don't remember if he died to the gank or if he had to blow a flash, but it was like that's just the type of timing that you cannot be losing out advantages on a gank to. Like if you're dying or losing flashes to a side lane 3:30 to 4-minute gank, then like that's a problem. So like that, Kiaya will make basic mistakes like that sometimes, which is why I don't have him like that high. But I do want to point out that Kiaya has a very, very high mechanical ceiling, and that when he's playing his best and he's playing on form and his team is playing around him, he can definitely be a strong enough carry to take games off of the Western teams. And even in Asian games, he was showing that he could be good enough to even outperform Bin in some of the games against the Chinese team. Merwin, I've heard there have been a lot of people who have been like mega disrespecting Merwin, in my opinion. It was kind of the same thing at Worlds last year, where a lot of people blamed a lot of the mistakes the team had on Merwin. I tend to try to give Merwin a bit more respect than other people do, because I think some of the time the reason why Merwin looks bad is because his team is not drafting properly around him. I think that if his team was more willing to allow his ranged top laners to receive more of the focus early game, then he would look better. Like I think that when you have a champion pool like Merwin's, if you use that champion pool effectively, you can get a lot of advantages in draft. And I also think that Merwin is decent at those picks. So like he has a Varus top counter pick into Rumble that he likes to pull out, and every time that he's done that, it's looked really good. He's not the greatest at Nidalee, but like Nidalee falls in line with his playstyle, and Nidalee top is strong right now, so Merwin's been picking that. My main criticism of Merwin would be that it feels like he can't play some of the meta top laners. So in terms of meta tops, he can play Nidalee, like I mentioned. He can play Ambessa, he can play Gwen. He is missing a lot of the standard strong top lane picks that you would like to be able to play. So like I don't feel like I've been seeing Merwin perform on Yorick or Jax or Aatrox, like these types of champions. So I would say like that's kind of a criticism for Merwin. But overall, I would say he is better than most people give him credit for, or at the very least he's more useful to his team than people give him credit for. Bwipo I have at the top of C. Bwipo's a very polarizing player for me because I always feel like he's the type of player who can step up at any time and be a really big player who can like match anybody. That's just the type of player he is. But at the same time, I feel like for the past few international tournaments, I've been underwhelmed by his performance. Like I feel like the same thing happens every single year with Bwipo, where I come into the international tournament and I'm like, man, Bwipo's been really inconsistent in regular season, but he has like really high highs, and then he pairs it with some really bad ints, right? And then I feel like what happens at the international tournaments is that while the highs are there, the ints tend to shine through more. So like at MSI 2024, he had a really poor performance. I felt like at Worlds 2024, even though FlyQuest did very well, I thought that Bwipo was not playing as well in some of the games as I would have liked to see him play. I'm kind of like at a little point in time where I would like to see Bwipo prove himself and prove that his inconsistencies won't drag his team down, but for now I'm not willing to put him any higher than top of C. In B tier, I have CFO's other top laner, GrivR. I think that GrivR is going to be one of the most fun players to watch at this tournament, in the sense that I'm really looking forward to see how he does, because I think that this split, he has shown tremendous growth from what I've seen from him in the past. It feels like his eye for engages has just been so much better than it has before. In the CFO video, I go through an analysis of one of CFO's games where they kind of have a collapse and then throw away a lead and then lose a game that they should have won. But in that game, GrivR looked absolutely fantastic, and I spend a lot of that game pointing out all of the great engage angles that GrivR found, and like the 5 different times within the game that he just like won his team the game, but his team couldn't convert properly. Yeah, I'm really excited to see how GrivR does. I think it's a good meta for him because champions like Sion and Ornn are strong, and those are the types of champions that he's good at. He's also shown that he can play like Gragas and Shen and stuff, but like that's less important. But basically, I think that GrivR's like really settled into his role on the team, and I think that he is extremely good at performing his role. So he may not be as flexible or as consistent as a player like Rest, but I think that GrivR's ceiling is like significantly higher than a player like Rest. So I've been very impressed with GrivR's year. I really want to see him do well at this tournament, so that's why I have him up in B. Broken Blade, I know that a lot of people have been saying that Broken Blade is not that good this year, that he's underperforming. That said, across the 8 total games that G2 played against MKOI, I thought that Broken Blade was the better top laner in the majority of the games. I felt like he outperformed Merwin when it really mattered. I mean, there was also stuff like when Merwin played against Casey, it just felt like he was completely lost against Kana, whereas I feel like Broken Blade is the type of player who would be able to figure out something. The other thing that Broken Blade does really well is that he has a very interesting champion pool that can give G2 a lot of special angles in draft. So like he has a Swain top pick that he likes to go, like a tank Swain top. He's played Mundo top. He has been receiving Warwick top bans. I think he played it like a couple of times in winter or something, but I don't even know if he played it in the spring. Maybe he played it in the spring regular season, but MKOI were like insistent on banning Warwick against Broken Blade, so I have to assume that Broken Blade's Warwick must be good. So it's like he has all of these interesting champions that could potentially give his team an advantage. I felt like he was the better performing top in upper bracket finals and grand finals of LEC. That said, I do respect the fact that he has been more inconsistent this year than he has in last year's. In other tier lists, I've had Broken Blade up in A tier. Not this time. This time I have him in B tier. In A tier, I've got Bin. What people need to understand about Bin is that he has been having a very weak split compared to how he usually looks. Now, the little asterisk to that is that there have been rumors floating around that some of the BLG players were playing bad intentionally, like as a protest to try to get Wei off the team. I have no idea if those rumors are true. Those are just like completely rumors. But that said, Bin did look better in playoffs. He was looking more like himself in playoffs until he played against AL, in which case he was kind of the worst top laner in both of those series. I'm leaving Bin in A, even though like we all know that Bin has the potential to be S tier, but I am leaving Bin in A for now because he's been too inconsistent in regular season, and by the time that he turned it up in playoffs, it was a little bit too late, and he still wasn't good enough to get advantages for his team and be more effective than Flandre was. Then moving into the S tier, I have Flandre there. I think that Flandre is super underrated by most of the community. Flandre's biggest strength is that he just has this like insane vast champion ocean. He can literally play every single meta top laner in the game right now, which is fantastic for Fearless. And he can play them all at like a very solid level. Bin may be better at than Flandre at certain champions, but overall, I would rather have Flandre on my team right now than Bin, because it just feels like Flandre is so flexible and fearless, and he's been stepping it up big time in my opinion. So I have Flandre there. That said, I'm under no delusion. I don't think that Flandre is a better top laner than either of the LCK representatives that they're sending here. Keen I have in second. It's the same Keen that we've all been used to for the past few years. He's pretty consistent for the most part. He can play most champions. He's good at carries. He's good at weak siding. He's great at turning losing matchups into neutral matchups. He's great at turning neutral matchups into winning matchups. Blah, 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 right? I also think that Keen is a very smart player who is especially good at map rotations. So in the kind of like lane swappy meta that we're in now, which is nowhere near the amount of lane swaps that we had last year or anything, right? But we're still like in like a kind of lane swap meta. Keen has always been very good at those. The only reason why I have Keen in second, well, there are two reasons. The first reason is that Keen did have a couple of pretty bad plays in their series against HLE, like some uncharacteristically bad, like, oh wow, Keen actually like made a really big mistake for once moments against HLE, so I kind of like have been thinking about that. And then the other reason why I have Keen in second is no shade against Keen, but Oh my god, Doran looked insane in playoffs. Like, okay, Doran being first here, I have to make myself clear, alright? This is like playoffs only, okay? Like, it's so hard for me to put Doran on here. Like, when I was making this top lane tier list, I was like hoping so hard. I was like, man, I really want to put Doran second because it's Doran, you know? But it's like, at a certain point, you just gotta respect what the guy does in playoffs. And against KT and against HLE, he looked phenomenal. If he retains even like 90% of the form that he had in those two series, he'll be the best top laner at the tournament probably. There are big questions, of course, of like, oh, well, will Doran step up? Doran has historically been not so great at international tournaments, and Doran's regular season wasn't the best ever. Like, there were a couple of games in regular season where Doran was like put on Nidalee top, and then he just like completely ran the game down and made the pick look useless, like that kind of stuff, right? Or even in finals, some stuff slipped in. Like, I know that everybody loves to mention like, oh, Doran died to the Krugs. It's so funny, right? But it's yeah, I don't know. It's like, as much as I may be hesitant to praise Doran because of what he's been doing for the past 4 years, I try to value playoffs performance more heavily than regular season when it comes to these tier lists, because those are the games that really matter. And in the games that really matter this year, Doran looked fantastic, so I want to give him the respect he deserves. And for the first time in my entire life, Doran has made it to the top of one of my tier lists. So congratulations, Doran, you did it, buddy. This is my jungle list. Again, we'll start from the bottom. So I want to note, once again, I have no D tier junglers. So think about my tier lists from last year. Whenever Croc went to MSI or Worlds, I had him in D tier. When Audi went with the LLA, I had Audi in D tier. Basically, point being that there are junglers who play in tier 1 regions who I am more than willing to place in D tier. And despite that, like, okay, if Pain had won, right? If Pain had beaten Furia, I probably would have put Karaoke in D tier. Maybe I would have put him in C tier because I feel like Karaoke has been playing a little bit better this split. But like in all of the past years, if Karaoke like made any other international tournaments in the past couple of years, he would have gone in D tier, right? Me having Tadu in C tier means that I respect Tadu to a degree. Tadu is an 18-year-old. He's very young. He's very promising. I think he has the chance to be really good in the future. The reason why I have him last is because in playoffs, it felt like there were a lot of basic mechanical mistakes that he was making that could have cost his team the game. For example, there was a game where he was playing Xin Zhao, and in that singular game, he screwed up 2 flash EQ3s, like in the same game. Or, like if I'm remembering correctly at least, it was either like an EQ3 or a flash Q3, he screwed it up somehow, and like those mistakes are the type of mistakes that you can't be making when you're against teams of this caliber. That said, I like a lot of, my favorite thing about Tadu is that I like a lot of the fight angles he goes for. So like he's the type of player who, if he sees an angle for a fight, the fight will only work in his favor if he can successfully perform a set of mechanics that are not considered easy. Like if it's a play that would require good mechanics to pull off. Tadu is pretty fearless and will go for it most of the time, which is why he can look so stupid at times, is because he'll go for the big play fearlessly, and sometimes it will work and it'll be great, and then sometimes he'll mess up a little bit and the play will go badly, right? But overall, I really like that mindset. I think that mindset will be very beneficial for his growth in the future. But I think that right now he's a little bit too rough around the edges to be pulling that stuff off against the best teams from all the other regions. So that's why I have him in last, but I have him in C because overall he has pretty good mechanics, and I like how he views the game. I like the fights that he takes and the fights he goes for. I think he's promising. Levi, I have in 9th. Levi's basically like inverse Tadu, essentially, where he's very old. He has, well, I say very old, he's like 27 or something, right? Which isn't that old. But he's old for a League player, and with that veterancy comes a lot of knowledge on how the game should be played. So I feel like Levi is very good at trying to keep his lanes stable, and then he's also very good at pulling the trigger on mid-game fights. Like, he's very good at progressing the mid-game with his team. He's definitely the leader of his team. In a lot of GAM's drafts, they put Levi on the go button, whether that's the Pantheon or the Vi or the Sejuani or whatever. They often give Levi the go button that starts the fight, and they give him the decision of whether the like objective fight starts or not. So I respect him a lot for that, for his knowledge and how consistently he can play the game. That said, it is absolutely clear at this point that his mechanics have essentially completely fallen off. He makes a lot of mechanical mistakes at this point, and it's like it's like in the opposite way that Tadu makes them. Tadu makes them because he's young and he's limit testing, and I don't know, maybe he's nervous or something. Levi's making them because he's like, his mechanical skill has left him and he can no longer do the things that he used to be able to do. But at this tournament, I'm gonna value Levi's experience, so that's why I have him above Tadu. In B, I've got Junjia. Junjia in the past has been the type of jungler that I would put in A, because he had very impressive performances during his short time in the LPL. Like, he helped EDG on their playoffs run a lot. And since he's gone to the PCS/LCP, he's always been either the best or second best jungler in the region, like at all times. That said, the reason why I have him in B this time is because I feel like him being in the LCP has actually like started to decline his skill over time. He still has the ability to be elite. Like, at first stand, some of his Skarner games were very good, for example. But overall, when I was watching LCP playoffs and when I was watching all of CFO's games, I kind of got the impression that Junjia has kind of declined, or I guess settled would be the right word. Kind of in the same vein where you see these crazy LCK talents get imported to NA, and then over the course of a year or two, their skill kind of declines a bit, and they're not the same player that they were anymore. To me, that kind of feels like what's happening with Junjia, where sometimes nowadays he will make mistakes or make decisions that he never would have made before. I still think he will be very good, and I also still think that if he was a jungler in the LTA or the LEC, he would be pretty good. But I no longer view him as like a shoe-in for A tier, where he's matching the best of the Western junglers. In B tier, this one might be a little bit of a hot take. I have Elyoya. Essentially, my take on Elyoya boils down to the fact that I think that MKOI was a solid team in winter, and I think that Elyoya is a very consistent jungler, and the meta is helping him out a lot. I think that it's a great meta for him. But my problem is that, so a lot of people think that Elyoya is like top of B or like breaking into A tier, like maybe the best Western jungler, right? The basis of that is that Elyoya was consistently doing very, very well for his team throughout the entirety of their spring playoffs run, and then he had a very good finals performance. Like, he had a very good grand finals performance. My problem with using that to move Elyoya up to A tier is that when I was watching the games, my impression was that G2 were kind of collapsing on themselves, and that their players were all individually making big mistakes in the game and throwing. I don't necessarily think that Elyoya did anything special to overcome G2 with his amazing skill. I think it was more like Elyoya was the same good, strong, consistent jungler he's always been, and did his best to keep his team in the game, so that way when G2 started running it down, he and his team were still in a good enough spot that they were able to accept that int and then use that to win their games. So I don't necessarily think that Elyoya has looked any better this year than he has in, like, let's say, like in 2021. I don't think he looks any better now than he did then. I just think he's kind of still been doing his same old solid jungling that he's always been doing. And it just so happens that the opponents that he ran into were making a lot of mistakes in the right moments when they should not have been. I've got Beichuan here. I think that Beichuan is by far the weakest LPL or LCK jungler here. That's not to say that I think that Beichuan is a bad player, it's just that realistically, Beichuan was the jungler for ThunderTalk, and ThunderTalk were consistently a fringe playoffs team, which means that they were roughly between like 9th to 12th place or something. That is the type of jungler that Beichuan is. That's the type of team he plays for. He wasn't even the best player on those ThunderTalk teams. So like initially they had Yucal, and Yucal was pretty good. And then once Yucal left, it was 1xN who started rising, and 1xN was the best player on that team. So like Beichuan isn't even the best player on the ThunderTalk teams that are barely slipping into playoffs. I would say Beichuan is probably like the somewhere between 5th to 7th best jungler in the LPL is what I would say. And again, that would make him a very good jungler. If he was in any of the other regions, other than LCK, if he was in LCP, LEC, or LTA, he would be a top half jungler in any of those regions easily, probably even like top 3. It's just that when all of the regions are only sending their best junglers, I don't think Beichuan actually stands out. Beichuan is a very utility-focused jungler. He's a dog jungler. He likes to play stuff like the Skarner and the Sejuani, and he's pretty good at those, but he's nothing special. In A tier, I have Skewmond. This is probably another one that people aren't going to like. They're not going to like the fact that I have Skewmond above Elyoya specifically. But going by the same vein, so I think that G2 lost most of their games in playoffs because they were throwing. And when I say that G2 was throwing, what I mean is everybody who was not named Skewmond was throwing. So I think that every single person on G2 not named Skewmond had at least one moment in one of the playoffs games that lost their team the game. Throughout all of that, Skewmond was very consistent, and he was doing very well. I think he's a very promising player who has a good understanding of clear paths. I think he has a good champion pool. I'm excited to see what he'll do. I think he could step up big time. Again, kind of the way that I'm phrasing these tier lists is like, if I was going to build a team, what junglers would I want on my team? And personally, right now, I would want Skewmond on my team more than I would want Elyoya for this MSI. I think that Skewmond was kind of low-key just getting griefed by his team a little bit. And then above him, I have Inspired. Inspired's been having a pretty great season overall. I mean, if you've seen Inspired at all in the last few years, like at any internationals or anything, you'll kind of, well, I shouldn't say that, because Inspired has underperformed at some of the internationals that he's been at. So like the internationals that he went to with Rogue, he underperformed. He did not look good last year at MSI. But I guess what I'd say is like the jungler that you saw at Worlds 2024, just imagine that. So Inspired is one of the more consistent junglers here, even though he's not like super consistent. He's one of the more consistent junglers here. I would say that his ceiling is much higher than a lot of these other players. And I think he's very smart about the game overall. I don't know, I don't really have too much to say. I mean, like when FlyQuest looks bad, it's because Bwipo and Inspired are kind of running it, but Inspired hasn't really been doing that much this year, so I've got more hope for him. I think he'll be able to be strong. I think it's fair to say that he's the best Western jungler at the tournament. Again, my read on Elyoya could totally be wrong. Like, Elyoya did have a very good playoffs run. I think he deserved all of the credit that he got for the playoffs run. But I just don't think that he's the type of jungler to be doing anything to, like, upstage Inspired or Skewmond, or, like, attempt to carry the game harder or be overall more useful when the team is functioning. I don't know, I think I'm kind of phrasing it badly. There's a heat wave and shit, my brain is all jumbled. This is what I think. I'm more than happy to read any comments that disagree, and maybe you guys can change my opinion. Moving into the S tier, I actually have Canyon in third. This might surprise a lot of people, because in the Gen G video, I was kind of like, low-key sucking Canyon off a little bit, but realistically, he's been one of the more up and down pieces of Gen G all year, and you know I like to say that I value playoffs more than regular season. And in playoffs, Canyon looked really good. In fact, we even got some vintage Canyon performances where he looked just as good as he did in his prime. The problem is that Gen G only played a singular best of 5, so it's like, how am I supposed to evaluate a player on only playoffs if they only play one series of playoffs? So it's like, I have to think about Canyon's regular season. And when I think about how Gen G looked in regular season, I feel like most of the time it was not actually Canyon who was like the best player on the team or solo carrying the team. Like, that wasn't his job, and he had his, like, he was not as consistent as I would have wanted him to be. So the reason why I have Owner above Canyon is because, like, Owner kind of had the same deal where you know, he had an up and down split. Sometimes he looked really good, sometimes he didn't look so good in regular season. But what I would say for Owner is that his situation is way different than Canyon's, because Canyon has a bunch of elite talent around him, so Canyon should be expected to be consistent. Like, Gen G is probably like one of the easiest teams to play jungle for ever, because you have two solo lanes that are like pretty much always going to be consistent, and then you have a bot lane who's going to like step it up later. So it's like, you can always trust everybody on their team to relatively do the job that they need to do, which makes jungling easy. Owner did not have that luxury in regular season. There was a lot of stuff going on with the team during regular season. Doran was having his ups and downs in regular season. There were a lot of roster swaps. T1 couldn't figure out what they wanted to do with Guma and Smash for the longest time, so both bot laners were underperforming, because, you know, when you're getting swapped in and out so many times, of course you can't perform, because you just have a lot of pressure on you to perform, so it's like, it's tough, right? So I would say that Owner's inconsistent regular season was not necessarily his fault, and then when his team finally did figure out what the hell was going on in playoffs, Owner looked fantastic. I said in my T1 breakdown that I thought that Owner looked just as good in playoffs as he's ever looked in his entire life, and then I also said that you can expect Owner to look like at this tournament what he has looked like in the past 3 years of internationals, implying that I think that Owner is a world-class jungler right now, like in playoffs. If Owner keeps his playoffs form, I think he's a world-class jungler and could very well be the best jungler at the tournament. So I'm going to value that over Canyon because I can understand more of why Owner was up and down in regular season than I can for Canyon. And Owner also got 2 best of 5s to show off in playoffs as opposed to Canyon's 1. So we have like more of a sample size that Owner actually is back in form. And then at number 1, I have Tarzan. So essentially, here's the deal with Tarzan, is that Tarzan, yes, he really choked super badly at Worlds 2023. And yes, he didn't look that special in Worlds 2024 or anything, but for anybody who's been watching domestically the LPL, Tarzan's basically been like either the best or like the second best jungler in LPL domestically for the longest time at this point. And then so the thing for me that moves Tarzan above Owner and Canyon is that I think I want to honor the fact that Tarzan has been looking elite the entire year from start to finish. There has not been a single point in the entire year, the Massif Cup, Winter Split, Winter Playoffs, Spring Split, Spring Playoffs, not a single time during that entire stretch where he's fallen out of form. He's looked fantastic through all of it, and I don't even necessarily think that his peak is like any lower, because he had like super pop-off performances near the back half of playoffs in those series against BLG. So I think that like peak-wise, you might be able to say that Owner and Canyon have the potential to be better than Tarzan, but like consistency-wise, Tarzan has just been leaps and bounds above everybody else this year, and so I want to respect that consistency along with the fact that he also has the largest champion pool across all of the junglers, or at least the largest like usable champion pool, so you can plug him on basically everything and he'll be elite. Yeah, for me it was kind of a toss-up of what I wanted to do with Canyon, and in the end I decided to move Canyon below Owner, but kind of heading into it I always knew that I was going to have Tarzan at the top of my jungle list, and I really hope that he has a good MSI. I want to see him redeem himself for his past crimes. Moving on to mid lane, this is my mid lane list. At the bottom, I've got Emo. It's not that I necessarily think that Emo's like bad or anything. Like he's really young, so like he's got time to learn. But it's just the mistakes that he makes in games are just so egregious that I just feel like he's going to be exploited by better teams at this tournament. I feel like so a lot of the mistakes that he makes are based on rotations and objective setups. And when those are the types of mistakes that you're making, that makes it extremely hard for your team to play. It makes it hard for your team to set up on any objectives. It makes it hard for your team to reliably have numbers for any skirmish. Emo will do a lot of things where he's late to catching the mid wave, or he like takes a greedy path to catch a mid wave that ends up getting him killed, or he tries to make a beeline from mid to an objective and then doesn't think about the fact that he has no vision and then gets killed on the rotation. Like he makes those types of mistakes, and better teams will always punish those types of mistakes, right? So I think that against better teams, Emo will be a liability. I do want to point out his strengths though. He works very well together with Levi. Levi and Emo have a couple of mid jungle combos that they like to run in draft that they can play very well in mid game. The Talia Pantheon, for example, I think is what I highlighted in my GAM breakdown. They played that very well together. So I don't want to say that Emo's like a terrible mid laner or anything. I just think that in a tournament like this, with this kind of scope and against these types of players, he will be a liability. I have Toots in C tier. It was kind of hard for me. I considered putting Toots in D tier, but at the end of the day, it felt a little bit disrespectful. I think he's better than that. So I also think that Toots will be a liability for his team at times, but I also think there is a chance that Toots is the type of player who may be able to step up and overperform. Toots is a very sink or swim type of player. It's really funny. Like if he gets ahead, he tends to snowball very hard and can get super ahead. And then the instant he falls behind, he just kind of starts running it down. So it's like, I feel like mechanically he is solid enough that he may be able to generate leads against most of the mid laners here, which is more than I can say for Emo. I don't think that Emo can generate leads against most of the Western mid laners, whereas I think that there is a chance that Toots could win some lanes. The reason why I have Toots in 9th is mainly just because I feel like he's a very exploitable player in the sense that when things start going wrong for him, they can go really wrong, and against better teams, they'll be able to snowball those advantages into just winning the game outright. Like once Toots falls behind, they're not going to let him back into the game. So that's why I have him in the bottom of C. But then, of course, I kept him out of D because I think that his ceiling potentially could be like pretty decent. Hong Q, this is a surprising one. A lot of people might not understand why I have Hong Q in C. Essentially, it kind of boils down to, if you are remembering Hong Q from first stand, then yes, Hong Q would be a B tier mid laner. If you watched the LCP a little bit more closely, you would notice that Hongq has a lot of issues. Hongq has a lot of stuff he needs to work on. Now, he's very young, so I don't want to label him a choker, because he's really young, right? But it feels like right now he's the type of player who can get very panicked and stressed in high pressure situations. There are a lot of games where when the game is like right at a breaking point and the next big objective setup is going to determine who wins the game, sometimes Hongq can panic a little bit and make a really big mistake that ends up costing his team the game. So like that's something that's very problematic from him. I think that, for example, in his series against Talon, I thought that he was the worst mid. I thought that Fofo was a better mid laner than he was in all 5 games of the series. So Hongq, like, clearly he's at a point where he'll hit a wall and he just there are some mid laners that he just can't be better than. Like he is simply just not better than reasonable LPL level mid laners, right? So he's got a lot of work to do in that front. I think that in the future he could grow into a very good player because, you know, he's like 17. I think he turns 18 this tournament actually, but yeah, 17, 18, had a really good first stand, has pretty solid mechanics. The biggest strength for Hongq, in my opinion, is that when he's calm and collected, he has a very good eye for fights. He has a very good eye of exactly how he wants to play the fight and how he wants to do it, which is a rare talent to have in a player this young, especially from a region like the LCP. So yeah, I would say that there is definitely a chance that Hongq can perform at B tier level. It's just that he right now has too many inconsistencies and too many issues with his play that I don't think he can be B tier reliably. I think he could, but it's not a guarantee, so that's why I have him in C. Above C tier, I have Caps tier. Essentially, this was like, I didn't know what to do with Caps. I feel like this has been one of Caps' weaker splits overall. I did not want to put him in the same tier as Hongq and Toots, because I feel like Caps does not have the same kind of like glaring, obvious issues with their games that Hongq and Toots do, right? So I didn't want to put Caps in C tier. But I also cannot in good faith put Caps in B tier when he has been performing so much worse than should be expected of him. Like in the series against MKoi, I was mentioning like with the jungle section that a lot of times G2 would lose because they would just individually run it down. Like for example, in game 4 of Grand Finals, G2 is in a mega winning position, and Caps basically like solo ran the game down and lost the team lost his team the game. And they were not like your normal rundowns. They were like completely unacceptable, borderline like looks like intentional feeding, right? So I can't in good faith put Caps in the same tier as a super consistent player like Quad, or a player who's had a good split overall like JoJo, right? Like I just feel like I can't do that. But of course we all know from history that Caps has the ability to just randomly turn it up for no reason. Like Caps was a top 3 mid laner at MSI 2024. Caps was better than Faker and better than Cream at MSI 2024. So there is always the chance that Caps will just step it up and be elite. Refuse to put him in B tier with the way that he was playing in playoffs. That's all. B tier, I've got Quad. Quad is essentially your stereotypical mid tier to bottom tier LCK mid laner who will be consistent and has good mechanics and can play mostly everything and will be relatively solid. I don't think that Quad has any special qualities about him that puts him above any of the good LCK mid laners. The only thing special about Quad is that he has an especially good Cassiopeia, which is always nice, but Cassiopeia doesn't have an amazing matchup into some of the meta champions right now, like Talia and Azir and stuff, so it's not always a world where you can just slam Cassiopeia every game and let Quad do his thing. I would say you can expect Quad to perform well, but that he does not have the ceiling to break into that like top echelon of Eastern mid laners. JoJo I've got above Quad because I actually think that one, JoJo has been having a very good split, and two, that JoJo's ceiling right now is a bit higher than Quad's. I also want to respect JoJo's champion pool. I feel like JoJo is a very creative player who's willing to look for angles to pick champions that other teams would not necessarily see. Like JoJo had a couple of good Cassidy angles in playoffs where he was able to identify that the enemy team comp wasn't the type of team comp that could stop Cassidy from scaling effectively, and then in both games he was able to hit level 16 and have a field day. So that type of stuff makes me respect JoJo a lot. He was definitely 100% a better mid laner than Caps in playoffs. So that's why I've got JoJo there. Then moving into the A and S tier where we have all the Eastern mid laners. Faker is at the bottom. It is a good Faker meta. We're going to be seeing champions like Azir, Talia, Twisted Fate, maybe Rise. Faker is good at all of these champions, so I'm not too worried about him. Like, historically, we've seen, like, at MSI, I think it was MSI 2024. Yeah, it was 24, where Faker's champion pool was so small that he was just getting abused in draft. Like, it got to the point where teams would just ban Azir, Talia, and I think, like, Nico 1, 2, 3, and then Faker just didn't have any champions, and he was not an effective mid laner. So, in those cases, he was a liability. This time around, I don't think he'll be a liability. I think there's enough champions that he can play that he'll be fine. But I mean, like, Faker's prime days have left him, right? He's not the same player he used to be. He doesn't have the same tremendous ceiling that some of the other top players have at this point. But you can always rely on Faker to be pretty good. And then the other thing that Faker does really well is that when you're in those extremely big pivotal moments where you need one player to step up to win you the game, to make the game-winning play, Faker is very good at doing that. Like, Faker will always be the type of player who just has the clutch gene in him, where he's able to identify when the game-winning moment has arrived, and then he snaps on it instantly. So I'll always respect Faker for that. I just feel like his overall average performance is just a bit lower than the other Eastern mids of the tournament. Next to him, I have Knight. Knight has overall had a solid year despite BLG's struggles. I guess the main thing to point out about Knight is that he was definitely not as good as Shanks in their 2 matchups in LPL playoffs. So in terms of overall strength, this is definitely not Knight's best split. There have been a lot of past splits where Knight is either the guaranteed best or second best mid laner in the LPL. This time, he's definitely not the best mid laner in the LPL. So yeah, in past international tournaments, sometimes you have these conversations of like, oh, who's better, Chovy or Knight? Chovy or Knight? This time, it's not going to be close. Like, unless Knight just massively steps it up and Chovy like trips over himself, Knight is not at that level. And then above him, I have Shanks. Notably, I kept Shanks in A tier. Shanks has been playing very, very well in the LPL for the past few years. I think that his like first big standout split for me was spring 2023, where he was on a garbage team, but every single time I watched him play, I was like, damn, this guy's actually like really good. So this is like his first time being on a real winning roster, and he's made a good time of it. I would say that you could reasonably say that Shanks is probably the best performing mid laner in LPL this split. All of the usual big names are playing worse than expected. Knight is playing worse, Rookie is playing worse, Scout is playing worse. But that said, the main reason why I wanted to put Shanks in A is just to display a clearer picture of how I view the gap between Chovy and everybody else. So like, Shanks is the type of player who has been kind of bordering on top 3 to top 5 LPL mids. And I do think he's gotten better this split, but I don't think that he's good enough that if you drop shipped him into like some of those past splits, like for example, like the split where Rookie was popping off on top esports, or the split where Doomby was popping off in LNG, or any of Knight's prime splits, you know, even the splits where Cream looked good, right? I feel like if you drop Shanks into any of these splits, like Scouts has had some extremely good splits in the past few years, I don't think Shanks would have been the best mid laner in the LPL in those splits. I think that the reason why Shanks is the best mid laner in LPL now is because he, who is normally top 3, top 5, has gotten a little bit better, and then everybody else who's usually above him has been performing way worse. So he's just kind of emerged as the best. But I don't actually think that he's like stepped up to become an insane, like, world-class best mid laner in the world type of player. I think that he is still A tier. And then I've got Chovy in S. I mean, like, Chovy has been the best player in the world all split. Any single time that anyone on Gen G was showing any inconsistencies, so like when Kenya was down, or when Ruler was losing lanes or dying on mid waves and stuff, it was always Chovy who would carry the team. Chovy is the biggest reason why the team was able to go 18-0. Chovy was the best performing player on the team in their one playoff series. I think Chovy's the best player in the world. I think that if he retains his form, then he should be by far the best player at MSI. Bot lane, once again, another role where I have no D tier players. So again, I'll give some examples. In past tournaments, when Easy Love was the ADC for GAM, I always put Easy Love into D or F. When Snacker made it from the LLA, I had Snacker in D. So by having no D tier ADC players. It's my way of saying that I think that all of the bot laners here are pretty solid. At the bottom, I have Artemis. I think Artemis is good. He's been one of the best VCS bot laners for the past few years now, starting with the Cerberus rosters from a few years ago. He was always one of the bot lane standouts. It's just that in this type of field, it's just kind of an unlucky draw. Like, I think if a different LTA South team had made it, like if Astral had made it, maybe even if Pain and Titan had made it, I would have been more comfortable putting Artemis above them. Like, I would definitely put Artemis above Snacker. I would consider putting Artemis above Titan. Maybe even at this point, I would put Artemis above a player like Route. But unfortunately, he had to run into IU, who I think is the most promising player in the entirety of the LTA South Conference. IU is super young, he's 19, very high mechanical ceiling, looked excellent in playoffs in my opinion. In both his lower bracket final series against Isarus Astral and his grand final series against Pain, I thought that IU was the best player on his team. The fact that I know that he has an insane ceiling, on top of the fact that he actually did perform when it mattered for the first time, is enough for me to want to move IU above Artemis. If you want to hear me glaze IU more and like give specific examples, I do that a lot in my Furia breakdown, so feel free to go watch that. In B tier, I've got Hans below Supa. I think in the 8 matchups that G2 had against MKOI, Supa was the better player. I think that Hans has also had stretches of time in the past few years where he's been the weak link on G2. Oftentimes, it can feel like Hans is either a passenger on the roster or that the team gives him gold leads and he can't convert. Mostly, I'm referencing what he looks like against Eastern teams. Usually against Western bot duos, he's fine. But I feel like against Eastern bot duos, with the exception of his performance against top esports at MSI 2024, Hans always comes up short and looks like he can't hold up against that top level talent. I still think that Hans is good. I still think he is one of the best bot laners in LEC. I just don't have too much faith in him for this international. And then on the flip side, I think that Supa has way stepped it up from last year. I think that Supa looks way better this year than he did last year. It feels like he's finally able to carry the games that his team needs him to carry. He had some really good performances in playoffs, like really good individual performances, especially on champions like Kai'Sa. He had a really good one. And the more impressive thing is that I think that a lot of his performances, he was winning in spite of his team's drafts. Like for me, my draft read for G2 was that G2 had a lot of really cohesive drafts that were easy to understand and easy to play, so Hansama's role should have been easy. Whereas Supa's teams, like MKOI's drafts, would either be like more difficult to execute, not necessarily worse, but like more difficult to execute because, you know, you have like volatile top lane picks who really need to win their lane. Sometimes you have drafts where you're picking like weak laners like Zeri, and then you have like a losing bot side 4v4, and then your top laner's playing Nidalee and stuff like that. So I always felt like Supa, whenever he performed badly in playoffs, it was mostly because the draft was just like really failing him and there was just nothing he could do. But then anytime that the draft did match up with his playstyle, he was the better ADC. And then even in some of the games where his draft should have been losing, he was still the better ADC and was able to, and his team was able to win the game because of what he, Jojo, and Elyoyo were doing. For this tournament, I'm moving Supa above Hans. Above that, I have Masu. I think that the thing with Masu is that he's got a higher ceiling than both Supa and Hans. When push comes to shove, out of these 3 Western marksmen, if I wanted to give one of them a late game hyper carry champion and tell them like, hey, it's your job to carry the team, you've got to do most of the damage in this team fight, you have to be the one that wins this team the game, I would want Masu to do it. I think this guy's trajectory has been insane. He didn't look that great in spring 2024, then he looked really good in summer 2024, and he's been looking just as good, if not slightly better, in spring 2025. So I think that the sky is the limit for Masu. I'm excited to see what he does at this tournament. But then all 3 of those guys I have below Doggo. Doggo is essentially your stock standard LPL bot laner, is what I would say. He was on bottom tier Ultra Prime rosters, but he was always the best player on those rosters and the only promising part of the team. Then he moved to PCS/LCP, and the entire time that he's been there, he's been either the best bot laner there or the second best, tied with Betty. And then of course Betty has also been in LPL for multiple splits. So essentially you've just got like 2 LPL bot laners duking it out there, And I don't think Masu, Supa, and Hans would be able to survive in LPL for as long as players like Doggo and Betty did. And unlike Junjia, I actually don't think that Doggo has decayed that much from his LPL form yet. So I think that he still looks just as good as he did on those Ultra Prime rosters now, especially when he gets champions with mobility. So like anytime that you give him something like Ezreal or Kai'Sa, he just instantly becomes like an elite level player. Like his Ezreal is up there with the best of the best. I think that Doggo's Ezreal could be just as good as any of the other Eastern bot laners Ezreal this tournament. So yeah, it's kind of one of those things where like trajectory wise, I think Doggo's kind of capped out. I don't think he's getting any better. Whereas I think that Masu and Supa potentially both have the potential to... That was two potentials. I think that Masu and Supa could potentially be better than Doggo in the near future. I just don't think that they're there yet. I think that Doggo's skill floor is high enough that he will reliably most likely perform better than the three Western bot lane representatives. In A tier, at the bottom of A tier, I have Ruler. If you watched my Gen G team breakdown video, you would know that I think that Ruler is currently the biggest weak spot for Gen G. He is still an elite player when it comes to working with his team in objective setups and late game team fighting. He is still fantastic at both of those. However, he has been having two really big issues this season. One is that he's just losing 2v2 matchups that he shouldn't be losing. And two, he's been getting caught out on a lot of mid waves and dying in mid game on timers that he should not be dying. So these two things are enough for me to just boot him out of S tier entirely, although I still think he's elite in many other ways. I have Elk above him, but also in A tier, because Elk has been having a very similar season to Ruler. Elk had a super inconsistent regular season where he was losing lanes he shouldn't be losing and dying on timers he shouldn't be dying, right? The instant BLG changed their jungler to Beichuan, a flip just switched in Elk's brain and he started playing really well again. So for the entirety of playoffs, Elk was looking the way that he normally does with his amazing performances. That's the reason why I have Elk above Ruler, is because in the one playoff series that Ruler actually did play, he was still making the same mistakes against HLE. Like, he was still dying 2v2. He still got caught out on at least one mid wave that I can remember off the top of my head. So the fact that I at least got to see Elk get over his inconsistencies and start playing well again was enough for me to move him above Ruler, who didn't necessarily do anything in his one playoff series to warrant the idea that he's changed his regular season habits. In S tier, I have Hope. The reason why I have Hope above Elk and Ruler is kind of a similar reason as to why I have Tarzan above Owner and Canyon, and that's that for the entirety of the year, there has been no single moment where Hope's form has declined at all. He has been a top-level LPL bot laner for the entire year, with no exceptions. His performance never dropped. If anything, I think he's actually playing better this split than he has in any of his prior splits. I think he is better now than he was on the 2022 JDG roster that made it to semis. I don't think that Hope is the type of player who has a higher ceiling right now than Elk or Ruler. I think in any given game, Elk or Ruler could play better than Hope, but I want to value Hope's insane consistency, which is why I have him in S, which may seem a little bit contradictory when I have Gumayusi above Hope, because Gumayusi has been opposite of consistent this year. In fact, if anything, Guma's probably been more inconsistent than Elk or Ruler. There was like a whole can of bullshit that happened to Guma early in the year, none of which was necessarily like super his fault. Like essentially, start of the year, I don't know, I guess his team had to read that I call it underperforming. I say that Gumayusi underperformed this split. A lot of people did not like that I said that, because they said like the reason why Guma was struggling was because it was not his meta, and the champions that he's good at were not super playable, and that the champions that he's not so great at were the ones that were really strong. Kai'Sa and Ezreal, there was a point where Kai'Sa and Ezreal were like super strong, and Guma was struggling on both, and Smash was better at him than better than him at both of those champions. In my opinion, that's the definition of underperforming. If you can't play the champions that are strong in the meta, you are underperforming. That's just how I view it. So there was like a whole debacle where Guma and Smash got benched back and forth over and over again. Because they were coin flipping so much, obviously both players don't have a chance to get in peak form because it's too inconsistent, right? So they would put Guma in, and then Guma would lose lanes that he's not supposed to lose, and then they would put Smash in, and then Smash would lose a lane that he's not supposed to lose, and it was just like super messy, right? Near the end of April, near the back half of April, the team finally decided to settle on Guma. But at this point, I mean, like the team was still pretty inconsistent. They weren't looking that great. The reason why I have Gumayusi as the best bot laner heading into this tournament is because I think that in his 2 playoff series, he has looked as good as I have ever seen him look in my entire life. Gumayusi has had stretches of time where he's been the best bot laner in the world. In my opinion, if he plays at MSI, similar to how he played in LCK playoffs, he is the best bot laner in the world right now with 0 competition. Elk has been inconsistent, Ruler's been inconsistent. Gala's pretty good, but I don't think he's like at that kind of insane level. Jackie Love has not been having an amazing split, right? So like all of the bot laners that you would normally hear at the top of the table, I think they're all struggling in different ways. Whereas Guma's ceiling right now is legit just maybe even like bordering best bot laner we've like ever seen ever, right? My only question for Guma is whether he'll actually keep that form. At the end of the day, it was only 2 best of 5s. So there was some real talk of like, I really did have to think about the order that I wanted to put these bot laners in. And at the end of the day, I just settled on Guma looked impressive enough in playoffs for me that I was willing to put him in first, despite what he looked like for the rest of the year. So that's kind of how that goes. Why did my support list just disappear? My support list is literally just gone. All right, that's, oh. Never mind, I spawned it out of nowhere. Cool, here it is. D tier, I've got Elio. Elio is a very inconsistent player. I feel like his champion pool is going to be a liability at this tournament. And then the other thing is that I think that even when he does get his champions, his ceiling is not high enough that he can outperform the Eastern or Western top laners. I think that right now, Elio's in the type of situation where once all of the standard engage options are out, he's going to start struggling and he's going to start dragging his team down. I said the same thing in my GAM team breakdown, and there were a lot of Vietnamese, like there were some players, there was like a coach, I think, like a caster or something, and they were all kind of saying that they think that Elio actually can play some of the range supports, but I just don't see it. Anytime that I see him on a lane dominant support, it just does not look as good as I need it to look. So like in my opinion, I would not trust him to play Renata against the bot lanes that we'll be seeing at this tournament. So yeah, I view Elio as kind of a draft liability. In C tier, I also view Kaiwing as a draft liability. If anything, Kaiwing like even struggles more on the lane dominant supports. Like Kaiwing can basically only play engage. He can play Alistar, Rel, Nautilus, Leona, Rakan, these types of champions, but you put him on anything else and it's going to be a disaster. I think that as CFO move into games like 4 and 5 of Fearless, they're really going to start struggling with their drafts. I think the only reason why they didn't struggle with this in the LCP is because I don't think that the LCP has any teams other than maybe Talon who actually have a champion pool big enough to punish this type of thing. But I think that once they run into teams that do have big champion pools and are willing to punish Kaiwing's ability to only play engage, he could end up looking really bad. The reason why I have him in C is because when it comes to those engaged champions, he's pretty solid. Solid enough that I don't want to put him in D tier. Jojo I also have in C tier. I view him as... My read on Jojo is that he's the type of support that can play everything at a reasonable level. So I've seen Jojo whip out plenty of range supports like the Nico, Renata. I think he even had like Seraphine games and stuff. He plays all of the engage fine, so he's a very flexible support that his team can use to kind of like build around him. I just feel like his overall level as an LTA South support isn't as high as the top level support talent from the other regions. That's about it. B tier. At the bottom of B tier, I have Lebrov. There are probably people who want to put Lebrov in C tier. I think Lebrov gets a little bit too much shit. Like the main thing that people don't like about Lebrov is that he has some really, really bad ints, and I don't disagree. But when I watch the games for myself, I can at least understand what he's thinking. There are some ints that a player like Kaiwing will make, for example, and Kaiwing will make the int, and I'm just sitting there in disbelief. I'm like, what did you just do? Why did you do that? When the Bravins, I'm like, wow, that was really ugly, and you played that really badly. However, I can see what you're going for. So it's like, the fact that I can at least like see the angle of what Lebrov is trying to do is like helpful. And then the other thing about Lebrov is that I think that because people love to point out all the mistakes that he makes, when he does play well, it tends to get overshadowed and ignored. He does have some really good games. Particularly, I thought his Thresh game in playoffs, in Grand Finals, was very good. It's just, you know, Caps kind of ran the entire game down, unlucky. But yeah, I don't know. Lebrov still shows games where he plays very well, so I'm not I haven't completely given up on him yet. I still think that maybe he has potential to be good. Busio is kind of like, he's the same type of player as Jojo. He's the can play everything player. I just think that he is at a higher overall level. I think that Masu and Busio are going to be one of the more exciting bot lane duos to watch at this tournament. Obviously, they looked really good against Genji in quarterfinals. I feel like they've managed to keep their form for the most part in winter and spring. So I would love to see Busio have a pop-off performance. Above Busio, I have Alvaro. I kind of have a similar problem with Alvaro that I do with Merwin, in the sense that I feel like his team does not actually take advantage of all of the strengths that he has in draft. Like I mentioned in my MKOI breakdown, there are a lot of angles that MKOI have to pick champions like Nico and Renata, and they just don't pick it. And then so there were people who were like, does that mean that you think that Alvaro is like bad at these champions? It's like, no, I don't think Alvaro is bad at these champions. I just, for whatever reason, his team's draft priorities just, they don't seem to want to put him on those champions. They seem to think that other things are stronger, or that other styles are more useful. To that front, you know, I can't really blame them, because Alvaro is really good at engage champ. Like he's like really good at engage champions. He has the same issues as all the other engage supports, where sometimes he'll just like lose his face and engage into the entire enemy team and then just die, and it looks really bad, right? But he also just has some beautiful engages. Like sometimes he just finds a fantastic angle that wins his team the game, and I'm just sitting there and I'm like, wow, I cannot think of very many players who would have found that angle. A decent amount of respect for the rest of his champion pool. The only thing is that I feel like his team does not utilize his large champion pool as well as they should. The reason why I have Alvaro above Busio is because I feel like when he's on an engage, he's like an A tier engage player, and then like a bottom of B tier everything else is what I would say. So when I average that together, I'm willing to move Alvaro above Busio for sure. In A tier, I have Duro. I think that over the course of the split, he has been looking better and better. I don't think he is an elite level support yet. And I also am not convinced that he will ever be an elite level support. But I think that he is a very good support who, at this point, would be able to function on any top half LCK or LPL team. Like, he'd be just fine on any of them. Yeah, he's proven to me that he can hold his own against the best of the best, and that's enough for me to move him an entire tier above everybody else. Then in S tier, I've got 3 supports. So there was like a small part of me that was thinking about moving on over Keria. At the end, I decided not to. So the thing with On, he's been one of the more consistent supports this year. So BLG had their on and off stuff. They were struggling sometimes, but through it all, On was always good. Bin struggled at points. Elk struggled at points. Obviously, they had jungle problems. Knight has not been looking as good this split as he has in the past couple of years. On is the one player on BLG who still looks as good as he always has. So for me, that's like definitely S tier. The fact that BLG looks weak is not On's fault, so that's why I have him in S. Contrast that with Keria, who of course, like Keria, had to deal with all of the T1 bullshit. It's going to be really tough for a support when they don't have a consistent bot laner to play with, because you constantly have to change your style, and you're never going to be like as good with communication as you would want to be, right? But the reason why I have Keria over On is pretty much the exact same reason why I have Guma above everybody else for bot laners, is because Keria looked really good in playoffs. Like, I cannot stress enough just how good T1 looked in playoffs. Everybody on T1 was firing on all cylinders in their 2 best of 5s. If T1 shows up to this tournament the exact same way that they showed up in playoffs, they could totally win, 100%. I'm not convinced yet, because, you know, they only played 2 best of 5s, and the patch that they played it on is now different, so it's like, who knows if there's going to be like a whole nother can of worms that opens up. But yeah, I mean, a lot of these T1 players, it's just they played so well over the course of those 7 games that I want to give them credit. So I kind of moved them all up based on what the peak of their performance was like in playoffs. Like Keria, for example, had a phenomenal Poppy support game. It wasn't even an easy angle to play Poppy, but he locked it in anyway, and then he just he found so many ways to be extraordinarily useful in that game. I would say that like he basically won his team the game in that one. So yeah, ceiling wise, I've got Keria above On. Above that though, it's the exact same deal with Hope and Tarzan. I have Kyle in first, because I feel like there has just been no point over the course of the entire year where this guy has not been elite. And if anything, I actually think that Kyle's like just been the best support in LPL this year, which may be a surprise to some because he was on a like 6th place LCK team and then he moved to the LPL and was on like a fringe playoffs team there. But I promise you, Kyle has been playing insane. He's the best support in the LPL. He is by far the most consistent support in the LPL, even more so than On. And he also has the biggest champion pool in the LPL. So basically, like, the way that I would view it is, do I think that Keiria's ceiling is higher than Kyle? Yes. However, I think that Kyle is good enough that I would value his insane consistency right now. So for me, he's the best support heading into this tournament. Then to wrap it up, we've got the team tier list. A lot of this is very self-explanatory, so like, I don't think anybody's going to be too upset about Gen G and should win. I think AL and T1 being in can win is also the general consensus. Some people might want this, just because AL's been so consistent, I would think that they would have a slightly higher chance of winning. BLG, I do not think have a chance to win. They have been looking way too shaky, and they were objectively a worse team than AL, even when it did seem like they were in form by the end of playoffs. Down here is where it gets a little bit spicy, I guess. The real big one is probably the fact that I have Koi in 7th, 8th. I want to make it clear that I think that Koi, FlyQuest, and G2, I think all 3 of these teams could beat BLG if BLG are out of form. Any one of these teams, I think, could slip into 4th. It's just that overall, my general read personally is that I think that G2, the mistakes that they made in playoffs are mistakes that should be relatively easy to fix, and that the reason why they lost to Koi was because they lost themselves. So I think that if I assume that every team is going to be a little bit better at this tournament than they looked in playoffs because they had time to like to practice and like watch their VODs and shit or whatever, I think in that scenario, G2 are the team out of everybody here who should have the easiest time fixing their mistakes. And if they do, I don't know if Koi beats them in the run back. So that's the only reason why I have G2 above Koi. If you had this, I would not complain at all. I think this is totally fair. Like, we saw Koi beat G2, right? So if you want to put Koi above G2, that is fine. I just have it like this because I think the way that Koi beat G2 was because G2 beat themselves. And not that Koi necessarily did anything crazy. To that degree, I also have FlyQuest above both. I think FlyQuest overall just have players that have higher ceilings than what MKoi and G2 have right now. I said in my team breakdown for them that I think that FlyQuest will be good enough to be better than at least one of the LEC teams. And if they're better than at least one of the LEC teams, then that means that they're in 5th, 6th, right? Like, regardless of whether you have this or whether you have this, I think FlyQuest can be better than one of them, so they're kind of like a lock here. Whereas I think that the other spot here could be a coin flip between the LEC teams. Then in the 8th place slot, I have CFO. There's a lot of hype surrounding this team after their first stand performance, but after watching them domestically, after seeing for myself how they play domestically, I am not confident that this team is better than the Western teams. They just make too many mistakes as a whole, as a unit. Their players, except for GrivR, tend to make mistakes when the pressure gets high, which is something that I really don't want to see from a team like this. I feel like their big standout player in Hongq is still too inconsistent to be reliable. So overall, I think I would be surprised if CFO were better than all of the Western teams. I would be pleasantly surprised, but I would be surprised. Then 9th, 10th, I have Gam and Furia. I want to make myself clear with Furia here. I think Furia can beat Gam. I think that realistically what's going to happen in play-ins is that G2 will beat Furia, and BLG will beat Gam, and then Furia and Gam will play in the first elimination match, and then whoever loses that will be in 10th, right? I think Gam is favored to win that, but I think that Furia can win. So I'm not saying that Furia is like dead last in the sense of like, oh, they're terrible. Like, if I thought that Furia was dead last, I would have made another tier and I would have put Furia there, right? But I very intentionally have Furia in the same tier as Gam because I do think there's a chance. I think there's a chance they could do it. Their roster has enough potential in there that I think that their ceiling is high. Gam has a lot of clear areas that you could target. Kiaya's over-aggressiveness in lane, Emo's bad rotations, Elio's champion pool, Levi's declining mechanics. Like, there are enough angles that Furia could use to beat Gam, but I think that Gam is favored overall because I just feel like they have cleaner mid games and that they work better as a unit. So yeah, that's what I would say for that, is that I don't try to mean any disrespect by putting Furia down here. And yeah, that's it. Those are my thoughts on the players and teams. Again, if you want some more detailed opinions on what I think about these teams and some of the players, you can check out my team breakdowns. I did an individual breakdown for each of the teams, so you could go watch those. And I guess that while I'm here, I do want to make prediction videos for the different stages of the tournament, but this time around it's kind of, there's not really much to predict. It's just the play-in stage, right? I think BLG is going to be first. I think G2 will be second. I would predict Gam to be third and Furia to be fourth, but I think that Furia can beat Gam. So that's what I think is going to happen in play-ins. BLG and G2 are going to get out. Gam and Furia are going to battle it out for who gets knocked out first and who gets knocked out second, and I think it could go either way, but I would slightly favor Gam. So that would be my prediction. Obviously, I can't really make much of a video with that because the skill discrepancies with BLG and G2 are just a bit too high, I think. But once play-in stage ends, I'll want to make predictions for round 1 of bracket stage. So yeah, stay tuned for that. That's all I've got for this one. See you all next time.